I'll be moderating tonight. And I feel deep honor to have, moderating this book, who is written by my mentor, who's taught us so much. Without further ado, I'd actually like to call the panel on stage, starting off with Mr. Ishrat Hussain, if we could have you here. Mr. Ishrat Hussain. He needs no introduction. He's a renowned economist and educationist, former governor of the State Bank, and the dean and director of IBA. I'd also like to call on stage Dr. Shamshad Akhtar. Has she joined us? Okay. There she is. Dr. Shamshad is also a former governor of the State Bank, and she served as a caretaker of the finance minister. Amongst other positions, she's been Secretary General of the United Nations and was the 10th Executive Secretary of the Economic and Social Commission. Next, I'd like to call Mr. Syed Salim Raza, who has over 40 years of experience in banking and the financial sector, while he himself also happens to be an ex-governor of the State Bank. I think Hamza thinks I'm really feeling very nervous, and truly I am, with this power-packed panel here tonight. Mr. Akbar Zaidi, I'd like to call you on stage now. Mr. Akbar Zaidi is a political economist and academic, and he teaches and does research on colonial South Asian history. He's taught at some very prestigious institutes, including Columbia, IBA. And most importantly, I'd like to call yourself Mr. Nadeem Hussain on stage, who is the reason why we're here tonight. Well, we'll learn a lot about him today and his journey. He needs no introduction. So, I'll just... An intro. Am I audible now, guys? Great. So it actually gives me immense pleasure to be sitting here tonight. Is this better? Okay. It gives me immense pleasure to be sitting here tonight and to have the opportunity to hear firsthand from each one of you, how you actually destined the making of this story that's covered in the book. And when I was actually reading the book, it was like literally finger-snapping moments for me. Like, oh, that's what happened, when each one of you literally appeared like these integral characters in the book. And, it was literally like serendipity when I was reading it. I know that's how a bank was born. And, you all are not just figures in this book, but you all played a crucial role in transforming the financial inclusion landscape of Pakistan. A Bank is Born is a beautiful yet a candid collage of Mr. Nadeem Hussain's personal and professional life, from early schooling to his college, from an employee of a multinational conglomerate to becoming a financial inclusion entrepreneur. The journey that ultimately transpired into a legacy in the shape of the largest microfinance bank and the leading branches banking platform of Pakistan, Tamir Bank and Easy Pesa. Dr. Ishrat, I'd actually like to start this with you. You've played an instrumental role in Mr. Hussein's journey. Not only were you the first governor of the State Bank that he shared Tamir's idea with, but it was actually during your tenure that Tamir got its microfinance banking license. And not to mention, it was actually during his tenure that the Microfinance Institutions Ordinance was introduced. Those from the industry would understand what an instrumental regulation that was. It was actually the regulation that transformed or formed the basis of microfinance in Pakistan. You very eloquently articulated the foreword to the book. And you've stated, I'd actually read this from the book, that your belief is that one of the functions of the central bank in developing countries where capital markets are imperfect was to promote financial inclusion, which would in turn spur broad-based growth. I'd love for you to reflect your journey on financial inclusion and how Tamir played its role from its inception.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here at KLF again, and particularly happy that I am invited to speak on a very exciting book, which is A Bank is Born, by an entrepreneur like Nadeem Hussain. Microfinance took its birth in Bangladesh with Professor Yunus as the pioneer. But when I joined the central bank, I realized that the commercial banks are all catering to a particular segment of our population. Corporates, the high net worth individuals, the trade finance, and some of the big commercial houses. But they were not actually going in to the majority of the population. They were excluded from the formal financial system, and most of the people in informal sector, especially at the lower end, were resorting to money lenders who were sharks in their way of dealing with them. And this made me realize that if the central bank can protect the interests of the big borrowers and big depositors, why should it look at the small depositors? And at that time, you were very young, I mean, not even born. There were scandals like Taj Company, Samad Bhai, and many others who had taken these young entrepreneurs, the businessmen who had just started their own businesses for a ride. So I decided that we should have a regulatory framework for the microfinance institutions. This was opposed by many, including, pardon me? Including Professor Yunus himself. But we got the support from the government, and we got the microfinance ordinance passed in 2001. And we got a loan from Asian Development Bank to establish Khushali Bank, but that was in the government sector. I was always looking for private sector participation because the experience with the government-owned banks has been miserable, and as I pointed out, that we had to privatize all the nationalized commercial banks. So I was very, very unhappy that only the government bank, Khushali, had come in. So comes Nadeem, whom I knew because during some period he was the country manager for consumer financing for Citibank. So I knew him. And he made the proposal that he's leaving his Citibank job and bringing in all his savings and plunging into this enterprise, which is a microfinance bank. In the heart of my heart, I was very happy that somebody like Nadeem, who's I consider is very competent in his field, is trying to get into this. But as my two other fellow governors would say, the central bankers are very conservative. They said to me, my colleagues, that how can you ask a commercial banker who has no experience in the microfinance, who has never worked with the poor segments of the population, how can you give a license to him? And I said, this is not the point. The point is that he is showing passion and commitment. The man is leaving his job with one of the best institutions in the world. He's taking all his money where his mouth is, and he is an entrepreneur. So we should give him a license. So that is how he got the license for Tamir Bank. And I feel vindicated that Tamir Bank when it was acquired by Ant Financial, was almost 45% was about 130 or 140 million dollars. Now that is a success story that right from scratch to the acquisition, this bank had transformed the entire landscape. Branchless banking, gold loan lending, we had the M-wallets, Easy Pesa. So that proves that if you have a passion and you have the right attitude and also competence, you can make it happen. So this is a big contribution in financial inclusion space as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely, and it was actually really heartening to see how you've mentioned in the forward, when Mr. Hussain came to Pakistan and the journey actually that he embraced to have gotten the license. And after the license, Dr. Akhtar, you have been another major supporter of financial inclusion. And, that too, digital financial inclusion, since a very long time, that requires a lot of foresight. It was during your tenure, actually, that the branches banking regulations were introduced. So we've got quite a star-studded panel here, microfinance ordinance, the branches banking regulations. And, these are the regulations that were actually going to transform the course of digital financial inclusion in Pakistan. So when you took office, as the State Bank Governor, it was during then that Mr. Hussain was actually raising funds from Telenor, a telco. And, at that time, well, even now it's tough to understand, how telcos can actually own a bank. And, I remember, reading the book where you said it was going to be very difficult to have gotten a telco to have owned a bank. However, you saw the whole picture, and you understood the impact that branches banking could have had on financial inclusion. And you agreed to a 51% stake that Telenor then took into Tamir Bank. Today we know Easy Pesa is moving Pakistan, about 3% of Pakistan's GDP. It's opened 33 million accounts in inception. These are numbers that have literally transformed a single institution, making such a huge impact. So, Dr. Akhtar, what drove you to make that decision, to allow Telenor to take that stake in Tamir Bank? And how did you foresee Easy Pesa transforming the financial inclusion landscape of Pakistan?
Before I get into these questions, I'd like to join Ishrat Saab in saying it's a delight to be here. And of course, an added attraction to be celebrating the book, which is a fascinating read. And Nadeem is very persistent because he kept on telling me I have to read his report and I have to be at this event. So thank you, Nadeem, for inviting me to join and celebrate your success. Your success is Pakistan's success and our success. I'd like to mention a few things. Ishrat Saab sowed the seeds and the foundation. But when I got in, it was almost my second or third day coming from Asia at large, from the Asian Development Bank, and largely having the experience of Southeast Asia and ASEAN at large. I just asked in my first few hours, how many microfinance borrowers exist in this country? And they said 500,000. This is 2005, towards the end, when Ishrat Saab had almost left and I had entered, and I was preparing to take over. So I almost fell out of the chair because I came from countries where the numbers were running into millions. The beauty was that we had the ordinance, we had the framework, we had some fascinating people who were involved in it, but we knew the banks are not going to do it. At the same time, we had a lot of microfinance institutions and some brilliant brains and commitment. So I talked to all of them. We had several consultations. How do we take microfinance or financial inclusion forward? And one of the things we did was to actually convert the microfinance institutions, the NGO type or whatever, into microfinance banks. So that was like the next step of the reform. And at the same time, we looked at the innovative platforms and thought, how do we go forward? Now, the moment we were thinking of this, there was one of the biggest microfinance discussion that took place in London. And it's important to put this in context, to just take the steps of the reforms of the central bank. So I was invited to speak there along with Bangladesh, India, and so on and so forth. And as Ishrat Saab has rightly pointed out, there were hardcore conservative central bankers who didn't want to get involved in microfinance policy, legal, regulatory framework. However, we were not one of those countries, and I didn't believe. In fact, I felt we need to liberate them and we need to let them grow to tackle our poverty issue. So at that London, when I spoke about the state of development in Pakistan and argued that we want to grow and we want to grow, we got a grant of 40 million from DFID, which is now the FCDO. And it was fascinating because when we talked about microfinance institutions transformation into microfinance bank, we actually formalized quite a bit the business. And what we did was use the grant assistance of the DFID, like Ishrat Saab talked about the Asian Development Bank 70 million, this grant assistance was 40 million. And we used this basically to strengthen the capacity of institutions, risk management, a gap in the commercial banking or low income spectrum businesses. So now coming to my interface with Nadeem Saab was very interesting. He came into the room and he talked about all the excitement in his life. And one of them was that I have these big guys from Telenor. And he said, I want you to come to my house. So I didn't know Nadeem that much. And so
Akhtar, yeah? This is the famous Akhtar you invited her for.
Yeah, so we had a cup of tea at your place, which was laid foundation. And in that meeting, he convinced me to just pack up the Telenor, just get the Telenor going with his. And that brought a bondage between him and me, and subsequently we have, fast forwarded, although I left the central bank, but me and Nadeem interface, and I'm so glad we did, because when I came back to Pakistan recently, about 5-6 years back, Nadeem invited me to another platform of his, which is Planet. And Nadeem then convinced me that from Karandaz, where Ishrat Saab and I have been together earlier, we basically talked about how do we go about taking the further steps forward. And it was fascinating that Karandaz has played a phenomenal role now in microfinance because we have set up a microfinance company. So we are taking everything forward in a systematic manner. And that company is doing fascinating work. So you see, growth takes place if you have natural courses of policy actions that you design. But one of the things we had to do was to make sure microfinance business doesn't get involved in the bureaucratic stuff and all that. So we took the strategy that was produced, we developed the strategy of microfinance, which was approved in the cabinet, and we introduced a development finance department in the central bank so that we could sustain the efforts that had been launched by both the private and public sector together. And that gave birth to, of course, Telenor, but subsequently, with his interest in fintech, he asked me for a grant assistance from Karandas, and we, with great difficulty, approved it because it was not a part of our mandate. And then we have subsequently been looking at His Planet and others. So I'll stop here, but I'm so, congratulations to you on your book.
That actually is, it personifies what you say always, you don't ask, you don't get. We've actually learned that from you. But actually, this is actually, now, when we were studying the sector, the microfinance sector, we used to read, the Economist Intelligence Unit's global microscope. And during that time, Pakistan was ranking amongst the top 3 in microfinance globally, second only to Peru and Bolivia, So it was so heartening to see. And, it was initiatives such as, the branches banking initiative.
Yes.
And also, I'd actually now...
That was, by the way, one of... And I wanted to just mention, and I forgot about branchless banking, I invited people with whom I had worked in the Philippines. And I wrote to the central bank governor because I was advising Philippines, and we had such a major breakthrough. Compliments to the central bank staff for taking it so swiftly forward. And after that, things really, and now of course we have such major revolution of mobile and smartphones and so forth, which is all covered very effectively in the book. So we don't need to go into the modern instruments and of course the Easy Pasa and all the other innovations that have come forward. And the last that now Karandas has supported is really development of the micro-payment gateway with the Bill Melinda and Gates Foundation, which is a 35 million assistance given to the central bank. And that gateway has resulted in the development of RAST, which, you click a button and you can send the money to the poorest of the poorest, and anybody who holds account, no questions asked. And I think it is another major revolution.
Absolutely. And another thing that Karen does, and actually at the time of DFID, you also alluded to it, was the microfinance guarantee facility.
Yes.
The first loss microfinance guarantee facility. And we have another governor, ex-State Bank governor, who was actually involved in that. My God, I'm actually really starstruck tonight. So, Mr. Salim, Raza, you were the one who actually brought in the microfinance credit guarantee facility, the first loss. And, we saw a lot of banks actually availing that, and then, how they actually served the microfinance institutions and banks. But I think more than that, what excites me is again, coming back to the book, you have been on the board of Tamir twice, once before your tenure as a State Bank governor and once after. And, you've actually served on the board of a commercial bank, HBL. What a dichotomy, serving on the board of a commercial bank and then a microfinance bank. Quite different animals altogether. You've actually seen Tamir through everything. You've seen Tamir at its peak. You've seen it through its troughs. You've seen the worst of frauds, default, even Tamir pivoting. So I'd like you to reflect a little bit, on the book, A Bank is Born, and, maybe share some of your moments as your, your involvement on the board.
The Tamir is the fulcrum of the book, but the book is, I think, it's an amusing book. It's easily written. It flows very easily. It's amazingly frank. He's given away all his trade secrets, how to be an entrepreneur several times over. And I think for many will find the book inspiring. The question you're left with as you read the book is, why was it when he was in his mid-40s that he sort of burnt the boats, crossed the Rubicon, and threw everything he had into a venture where, he knew that he was starting on a he was hanging by a very thin thread, just about, he pulled out all stops and got everything he could got. If anything went wrong, survival would have been difficult. So somebody with that sort of urge to succeed as an entrepreneur, what on earth was he doing for the 20 years that he wasn't? And then, if you read the book, there's a constant strain from the beginning, from his earliest days. always sort of pushing the limits of possibilities. For example, finishing it, winning the Victor Lidorum, the athletics championship at his school in the last 2 years, both times, finishing at his college in America in 2.5 years, doing extra courses so he could get out quickly and roll his sleeves up, get into life, learning Chinese, and then making speeches in Chinese while he was working at Citibank Hong Kong. And then in other ways, also pushing the limits, bought his car long before he got a license in America. That's dangerous. Selling suits at the Macy's department store, where he would measure people. Now, the men's suits are standard, but he'd measure them so they felt slightly special. And then he'd say 42, 40, he said his size was 40, he said 42, but I think it'll suit you perfectly, let me see. And he'd nip and tuck and say, it could have been made for you, you're a tailor's dummy. So the man would, feel extra chuffed. Some wife would look at him admiringly and he'd buy 2 suits. There was someone else he told that he'd found that his shoulder, that the length from his shoulder to his elbow in one arm was greater than in the other. So as this meant some sort of very rich genetic heritage, and it might have been a family of sword fencers or something. Anyway, the man, puffed his chest, with pride, and his wife admired him. At last, for the first time, there was something unusual about him. He bought 4 suits. But so, see, he was, always a little more than just what whatever he was supposed to be. He joined Citibank, and I had a long career with Citibank, but I haven't seen anyone with get the variety of experience that he got in his 20 years. He worked in the corporate bank, in investment banking, in insurance, in consumer banking, and risk management, structuring complicated transactions, and general management when he ran countries and regions. Which is quite, and in areas as far apart as Atlanta and Hong Kong and lots of places in between. He came across microfinance when he was looking after part of the Middle East for Citibank at a conference in Amman. And he mentions it very interestingly how suddenly, he realized that something he really wanted to do was now possible. First, he wanted to go home to Pakistan, work in Pakistan. Secondly, he wanted to do something new where he could overtake people who were doing things in an older style. And he wanted to do something with big social impact. So that's how the idea of Tamir was born. And he started with 3 or 4 people who'd worked with him at Citibank, who he was very comfortable with. And his book is full of praise, actually, for the founders, for the people who joined the bank with him. He really regarded them as managing partners, not as people who reported one down to the CEO, but as people who were left alone to do what they could, do something creative, develop new thoughts, new ideas, and if something went wrong, he'd forgive them because, as he said about himself, I would rather seek forgiveness than ask for permission. It's a dangerous admission, but given what he's been able to achieve, you must take that as good managerial guidance. So Tamir, Nadeem knew from the beginning that if he tried to grow like commercial banks grow, bricks and mortar and branches and people, he'd never get anywhere. The amount of you might get a large number of clients, but the amount of money we're going to make from them was going to be too little per client to make that a huge expense commitment. So you had to do something in a different way. He had to use existing technology for purposes it was possible to use it for, but people hadn't thought about it. And he had to look for distribution outlets, not 100 or 200, which is really how far a branching network could take you, of 300 or 400, but tens of thousands. And then in his relationship with Telenor, he tied those 2 things together. Telenor had 40,000, 50,000 outlets where you could recharge your phone. And these were Kiryana stores. These were little shops all over the country. So with them as outlets, with his technology matching, fitting into Telenor's technology, he created Easy Pesa. How would you get someone who's never used a bank, who banks wouldn't take in anyway, how do you get them interested in using financial services? And that was remittances, because these people visit these kirana shops all the time. So what became possible was that you could remit money from here and have someone collect it in Peshawar at the same time. That's what Easy Pesa made possible. Then, of course, a lot of things were added on to it, and mobile wallets then developed. And all this was done on a low-cost base, hugely scalable, hugely cost-efficient, and that was a success. But when I joined Tamir, I think Akbar was there on the board before I was. So Akbar was there when I joined the first time, I think it's 2006. And within a year, Nadeem, of course, had, as I said, he tended to push, and he pushed too far, and there were some problems with loans. Which isn't really, banks have that, that's not damaging, but there was a problem with liquidity. And liquidity, loans you can recover from, loans you can compensate through recoveries, or you can make up through income that you earn. But liquidity problems, as they arise, really could put a stop to the bank business. And the long arm of the State Bank could pick you up and restructure you. I mean, people may or may not realize the State Bank has restructured several of the banks that were given licenses, commercial banks also, in the 99-2000 period. It restructured them later. Anyway, so I was a bit nervous about what the outcome was going to be. But with Nadeem, the conversation was never about anything other than higher, faster, greater, all up and away. And I used to wonder, what does he eat? What world does he live in? Is he smoking pot? But none of it. He was looking at the hill on the other side. He wasn't looking at the damn valley he'd have to pass through. And he got that hill, in this company, in this merger with Telenor, which was excellent for both of them. And the loan problems were resolved. The bank absolutely took off. And that's his understandings there really were what led to Planet N, where he put together a large stable of companies, and he talks about them very interestingly and about the people. Some of them have done extremely well, but the conclusion he came to, or the knowledge that he gained, which is what he's going forward with in his next venture, was that data is explosive power, because you can use it many ways. So each of these different businesses develop their own databases, and if those databases could be collected, then other businesses that could look into all those combined databases, and from that find angles of entry for themselves using their own sort of AIs and machine learning. They could run their product characteristics of those clients who would be interested in their product, identify them, create new possibilities for business. So this is the exponential way of growing at little cost. And as he goes into the digital bank, this is, I think, the one thing that has inspired him most, and that's going to be the talisman, I think, as he sees it. It's in the book, all described in the book, of being able to grow, with cloud computing, with open APIs, easily accessible to customers. Credit, of course, as a leader, because it'll attract to you lots of fintechs and other startups and e-commerce entities that need credit or that need banking services. Besides, and then with all that data, you can come up with your own proprietorial initiatives. So it's a great idea. He has a whole chapter on his wife and the inspiration she was and she is. And if she hadn't, of course, the thrill of the chase overcame the risk of fear when he burnt his boats and leapt into Tamir. But his wife stood absolutely solidly behind him, and both of them, each have their own ambitions and their own successes. But they're very good in terms of mutually reinforcing each other unquestioningly. So he does spend a fair amount of time bringing that out. So, sorry, these are impressions of the book. Ta'mir is, of course, the fulcrum, but it's led to many other things.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing those lovely moments. I know for all of you who will read the book, it's a very relatable read, he talks about his parents as well and his childhood and how he actually evolved, from being I think right from your childhood, you were very passionate. But, those who know Mr. Hussain, he's charming, he's witty, he knows what he wants. Working with him, we've seen all of that. So for all the younger entrepreneurs who are here, I think there's so much to learn from his experience. So, it's actually something that you definitely must read and experience for yourselves. And actually, I'd like to read this one, quote from your book. It says, if you can dream about something but cannot execute, it is daydreaming. But if you execute without dreaming, it's a nightmare. I'll leave it to you guys to figure out where in the book that comes. But I'd like to come to you, Mr. Akbar Zaidi. You're a very accomplished political economist. You are in academics as well. And your affiliation with Ta'mir also dates back to, right before it was actually born. When you met Mr. Hussain in DC, and he shared his idea with you. I believe, you at that time thought it was going to be a hit. I'd like to learn from you, within the space of political economy, and that too the political economy of financial inclusion, I'm sure you must have seen how, the different institutions were playing their role. How did you see Ta'mir's future, in the political economy of financial inclusion of Pakistan? And, reflecting on that as well, I'd like you to, if you are to share something with your students from this book, how would you actually, what is it that you share with them?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm surprised I'm on this panel because I'm sitting with 3 former governors of the State Bank, of the Central Bank, and all 3 are mentioned in the book and I'm not. So, I have no idea why. So, and I'm going to come to that because there's a lot to say. Okay, Shahzad Naqvi is mentioned, Tariq Mohar is mentioned, lots of other people are mentioned. I'm not mentioned. And मैंने कहा कि आ जाओ बोलने, मैंने कहा ये मैं ज़रूर बोलूँगा. मेरा जिक्र नहीं है और आपने मुझे बुला लिया. Anyway, so there's a long history and I'm going to I might come to the answer, to answer your question, but I probably won't. I've known Nadeem for 51 years. We grew up in the same neighborhood. We used to play cricket. East Avenue ke paas hum log rehte the. And the other people I can recognize who used to live around there. And we used to play cricket. And this is 1972, 73. Then he became my house captain in the school. He'd come from St. Pat's and joined. He became house captain of Napier. I was 1 year junior to him. And from his book, I've learned 5 things. And I'll come to 3 later. 2 I'll talk about. 1, I thought he was much older than I was. And that's not true. We were born in the same year. He's only a few months older than I am. Okay. The second thing that I found from the book was very interesting. There was a lot of gossip and chatter कि इसने तामीर कितने का बेचा है. ये बड़ी बात है कि कितने $1 million कमाए इसने. So if you read the book and you do the maths and the arithmetic, you'll get a good figure of how much he made. And I'll leave it up to you to do your guessing. It's a good exercise to do. So I knew Nadeem at that time, and there were 3 people, and I'll say this, I haven't told Nadeem this, there were 3 people who I admired a lot and who I thought would do exceedingly well. And Nadeem was one of them. And there was another guy who did well as well, and another guy who didn't do well at all. So these 3, all from the same batch, 1 year earlier in school with us. And then Nadeem and I, we didn't see each other. He graduated, he went off to the US, as Salim said. I did my own stuff. And then, I was studying abroad. I came back. I started working at Karachi University. Then I became friends with Sherry Rahman. And she was the editor of the Herald, and we used to hang out. And sadly, Tito, who we miss every KLF and otherwise as well, with Tito and Sherry and Zafar Abbas and others. So I became very friendly with Sherry because she was the editor and I used to write for them. And then suddenly Nadeem appeared on the scene. The next time, from 1973-74, Nadeem गायब है scene से कुछ नहीं पता क्या कर रहा है ये वो, and then he appears onto the scene, and then he becomes part of Shari Rahman, and and then it's a different story. It's a different story, as Salim said, which I'll talk about. So there are three. So I met him I had invited Sherry to give a talk before she became famous at Johns Hopkins, where I was teaching in Washington, D.C. And Nadeem dragged along. And there was a dinner in which there was Hussain Haqqani and Farhanaz Isfahani. And Hussain Haqqani wasn't the ambassador at that time. So Nadeem said, "Yaar, main microfinance bank khol raha hu." So I asked him about 5 or 6 questions. I said, "Ye pata hai, ye pata hai, ye pata hai." And he knew much more than anybody else. And I had studied a little bit about microfinance. And I said, "You'll make loads of money." I said, "This enterprise will be extremely successful." I mean, instantly. So it was what I had seen him grow up with in school and all that, and his enterprise. And then, and because he had done his homework, I think that was the most important thing. So there are 3 things in his book which I read very carefully. And I think one is about being brave and making extraordinary decisions. After 27 years of Citibank, you either join ABN AMRO like our friends here, or you do something else. You do something else, or you join another bank. You jump from bank to bank. So after 27 years, this guy says he was in Iraq and he was in really exotic places. I don't know if exotic is the right word, but he was in places after the war on terror and 9/11 and, thinking about Amman and things. And if you read his book, he talks about a who's who of everybody who's ever worked for Citibank. And, from Shaukat Aziz to Rana Talwar to people who've really made it big and all these 3, my panelists are also mentioned, and I'm not, as I said, but that's another story. I'll baad mein puchunga. So there are 3 things that one is that he's very brave, as Salim said also, that, you've got a fantastic job, 6 or 7, 6, I think, 6-figure salary at that time, or maybe 7. And aap kehte nahi, yaar, maine kuch aur karna hai. And he said, I had he also lists his bucket list in that as well. And so that's one thing that I learned. The second thing that you learn from this book is about leadership. And he talks a lot about, how he succeeded. And he kept saying that I got the right people to work for me. And I think that's very important. If anyone is in a position of authority and you may be brilliant and exceptional with ideas and you've got idiots around you, your company or your firm or the IBA or whatever it is not going to work. You need people around you who you can rely on. And that's something that comes through very clearly in this. And the third thing is what Salim said, this book is also about Shari Rahman. And I think it's also, it's very interesting. There's a whole chapter. I mean, nobody writes a chapter about a bank and they write about your wife, but he's done that. That's courage. And what he writes about Shari Rahman, and I don't know how many of you know Shari. I've known her for decades now. And she's a very strong woman and, a tough person to be around. And he admits that. And he says that, try to be Shari's husband and you'll find out kitna mushkil hota hai. Not in those words, but, close to that. But and he actually pays her huge tribute, saying, and he recognizes what she's done for herself. And, there's in this chapter, there's her history as well, and his interwoven one when she's, the 18th October attack in Karachi, then Benazir, jab wo shaheed hui thi, us waqt ka, and a couple of other incidents as well. And he writes very sort of affectionately and enthusiastically and in a very engaged way about how his life has changed with Shari and how they've both, exactly as Salim said, how they've lived with each other. And both, are amongst the most accomplished individuals and couples that we see around in Pakistan today. And I think it's their individual strength as well as their sort of the collective spirit through which they've emerged. So one of the things that I wanted to ask him, because he's going to speak next, is that in his bucket list, he says he wants to walk the Gobi Desert. So now that he started this company called Planet N, I mean, Planet S hota to samajh aati, Planet N, Nadeem, I mean, apna naam bhi to yaar chhod do yaar, ab bahut ho gaya. To S le de to zyada wo, ho jata hai कि भी आपने अपनी बीवी के बारे में भी सोचा है किताब के अलावा. लेकिन वो नहीं इन्होंने Planet N रखा है. And let's see where that goes. And I keep hearing about it, and he called me yesterday and he said, I want to hire people from the IBA. So I think that's good news. If Planet N is expanding, the rest of the economy has collapsed. But that's for another session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'm sure the next book he writes, he'll definitely mention you. So a book is born, a bank is born, the book collects and expands into, upon your journey of passion, drive, dedication, and I'd say borderline insanity, as a lot of people would understand, most entrepreneurs would understand. And that's what's so relatable. It's actually like a guiding path. When you read it, you'll understand there's so much to take away from it. And also, there's a lot of hope that one actually gets when one reads it. I'd actually like to quote something again from the book. I quote you. You'd say, "One ambition kept me going. My identity is Pakistani, and I have not done anything for Pakistan." Many people must have rolled their eyes when you shared your idea with you. A star city banker earning a handsome salary, traveling the globe, and just plunging into a world he had never seen. What motivated you to start Zamir? And, how did the idea of even making a bank make it to your bucket list?
Thank you, Naureen.
Let me just say, Sherry Rahman quotes, "I married a person who was rubbing shoulders with the Prime Minister. I didn't know that he will sell buffaloes."
That was one of the changes. Thank you, Naureen. First of all, before I'll narrate what the thought. In 1994, I was in Hong Kong, and I went to a seminar, and one of the things that came back was that, if you really want to accomplish what you want in life, so there are two schools of thought, either you articulate what you want, or, you don't, and you can still get to your destination, but there are two different journeys. And I made a list at that time, which had, that I wanted to create a microfinance bank, and I didn't know much about didn't know anything about microfinance, except that I'd read, the Grameen Bank book. I wanted to learn a language and try and, speak that. I wanted to write a book. I wanted to get to the base camp of Mount Everest, which is now not something that I'm going to try with, or walk the Gobi Desert. And there were some material things in there as well, which that's the better part. So that's what I thought about it. But actually, as the book says, I was in Amman doing a project for Citibank, and the Iraqi bankers were there, and a microfinance specialist, Dr. Mayada Bedas, came into the room and talked about microfinance. And that evening, I talked to the people who were there, two of them then became co-founders, as to why we can't do this in Pakistan. Now, there's a huge difference about thinking about doing something and executing. And one of them was this whole thing, as several people mentioned, having a very secure, tax-free salary, take your entire savings and put it in the bank. And that's why there's a chapter on my wife in the bank. Because without her support, none of this have been possible, because she was saying, is that what you really want to do? You want to give up this whole thing and go back to Pakistan, a country you've never worked in except for 5 years, a business you don't know anything about, and you want to take our entire savings, which is what I did, and put it up as capital in the bank? I said, yes. He said, okay, go ahead. So thank you, Syed, for having that faith in me, which my investors subsequently had. And it's very important that, and especially if I'm sure in other occasions as well, but if you're an entrepreneur, you're putting capital at risk, and if you're putting your own capital at risk, and that risk is not the capital is not just yours, it belongs to your spouse and your family, that your spouse has to be totally behind you. And she was. So, I'll talk about many verses, I'll talk to some of the inflection points in the bank's journey and my journey, but for Sherry Rahman, I've dedicated a sher, which I'll narrate, and which goes, "Ek din wo mil gaye te sare raah guzar kahin, fir dil ne baithne na diya umr bhar kahin." So from that idea of starting a bank, I actually took the next flight and I flew to Pakistan, and I walked into Dr. Ishrat's office. And I knew, when I was consumer head, Dr. Ishrat had appointed me. They had a if you remember Y2000, where the whole data thing was going to change. And as a young consumer banker, he still appointed me to orchestrate, to ensure that all Pakistani banks met that standard. So I made a lot of enemies from bank heads at the time, but I made a friend in Dr. Ishrat who felt that I could execute what he had given me. So when I walked into his office, I told him that this is what I wanted to do. And, as I said in the book, he was very positive. He said, okay, we're going to support you as much as we can. And that was the first real support, because if you read the book, you see that our capital structure was very creative, okay? But Dr. Ishrat supported that, and that's when I started. Now, the difference between my two co-founders from Dubai who, I got along, gave them sweat equity, and took at the same salary they were making was that they kept the children in the schools in Dubai. They weren't sure if this was going to pan out or not. Their families remained, and I was all in, okay? Because if you're going to do something like this, you have to be all in. You can't second guess your own judgment. Even if you're wrong, you can't second guess it. You have to be all in. You got that commitment and focus. I was very fortunate in getting my team together. And I think Brigadier Tariq Mahar, Johor Naqvi, Umema, some of the old Tamirians I see. If I'm missing anybody, I'm sorry. My original team, they're the people who kept me grounded, okay, especially Tariq Mahar. I mean, he was just such a great partner to have. And my two other co-founders as well. But Tariq had an exceptional role. And then, and the reason these people are here, because they have a very special role in the creating of Tamir Bank. Dr. Ishrat, initial person who not only, gave the license, but supported me and gave me the confidence that to come back and do this. Dr. Shamshad, because I'll narrate a story in the book. So we had put in initial capital, and in first year, we were typical city bankers, the four of us, because we came from Citibank. We believed we would walk in water and not get wet. So in the first 1 year, we were wearing our suits and ties, and we gave out 15,000 loans, no default. Next year, the default rate went to 30%. We found out what fraud is like in Pakistan, and we found out that we really didn't know microfinance. But when you have skin in the game, you learn very, very fast, and we learned fast. That was the time the branchless banking regulations came out, and I needed an injection of capital. We raised another $1 million. I put in whatever had been left of our savings with my wife's support in the bank. So then I had zero savings. I put in everything. I needed the Telenor deal to happen, okay? And Dr. Shamshad doesn't remember as well. It was Ramzan. It was Iftar. Dr. Shamshad was there, and John Eddie Abdullah was there. Both of them had been fasting. Well, I was not. So I was waiting for them to break the fast. And Telenor wanted 75%. Dr. Shamshad laughed and said, you'll be lucky if I give you 20%. So I had to find a happy medium, which was 51%. And so the Telenor deal is exciting. So I was negotiating with Telenor. There were 6 of them on the other side. There was, myself on one side. They had agreed to a much bigger number than the deal got done at. But at the same time, they lost their license in India. They lost a market cap of close to $5 billion overnight because their license in India had to be surrendered. The deal moved from local to corporate headquarters. And the dynamics of the deal changed. So final meeting, I'm sitting with them. They quoted a number. And I wrote a piece on my number on a piece of paper, and I handed it over to them, and I said, this is the number. I have multiple investors, which I did not. I had 3 months of money left to run the bank, otherwise I'd have to go to the state bank to bail us out. I said, this is the number. You want to do the deal at this number? I'll do it. I'm going out, and I admit at that time I smoked, so I went out and lit my first cigarette. Nobody came out. So I said, okay, this kind of deliberations take time. And I lit my second cigarette, and nobody came out. And I said, you overplayed your hand. There's going to be no deal. This was it. And while I was thinking about this, the person from the negotiating team came out, sat down and said, we agree with your number. The bank was valued at $25 million at the time. They put in $12.5 million. More importantly, we got the brand and the network of Telenor, and that changed the entire value proposition. The third interesting part, so we learned a lot, we pivoted, the team was strong, we were resilient, we learned, we became more humble, we stopped wearing our suits, I opened every branch with Tariq Mahor that we had from Karachi Fish Harbour all the way to Aptabad, 300 plus branches, we opened ourselves, we clocked in more miles than anybody I know, who has ever worked for a bank. So we understood what was happening on the grassroots. The team was from the grassroots. So it was a really mind-blowing experience in learning what Pakistan was out of a bubble of beach, beach luxury and the elite where I, usually used to hang out. And that was the big learning experience. The third pivot was when the final deal of Planet N was, Tamir's sale was taking place. I flew to Oslo, and I usually have two wallets, a foreign wallet and a local wallet, and I got in the taxi, and when I got to the hotel, I only had my local wallet. And luckily, I had a card, local credit card, which I gave to the taxi. I got to the hotel, and they dropped me at the wrong hotel, so it wasn't very auspicious. So then I walked into the Telenor office. I had zero money in my pocket. I asked one of the persons I know to lend me 100 euros because I left my wallet behind. And that was the chairman's last day, the Telenor chairman's last day who I was negotiating with. I had a number in mind which, my able economist says you can figure out if you read the book. Half an hour later we came out, the deal was done. That was the time, they valued us at that time at $100 million, first time in Pakistan. A year from that, Telenor collapsed Easy Pesa and Tamir Bank together, and it was valued at $410 million. A bank made in Pakistan by Pakistanis, showing that you can create a unicorn, or at least a half a unicorn, if you do this. Next venture. So these were, all these people I thank once again, they were instrumental initially in the inception, and then Salim was outstanding on the board, as was Akbar. They were independent directors, but let's say they were a little bit less independent than Telenor would have liked them to be. But it's not that they favored me, but they used their logic like they did. And they understood, the vision that Tamir Bank team was trying to put together. So this was one of the biggest and really one of the few Pakistani exits in Pakistan. The book is written, other than, the earlier parts, to inspire young entrepreneurs. 3 or 4 things. One, there's no age when you can become an entrepreneur. I was 48, okay? And if you believe this, the longer you wait, the more difficult it will be. You've got to break those salary shackles of your corporate life, and you've got to take risk. You don't take risk, you're not going to happen. Surround yourself with people. Now I say that to all, and I see many Planet N young CEOs, co-founders over here. So I say I surround myself with people who are smarter than me. And my wife will immediately say that's not difficult. But I surround myself with people who are smarter than me, but not wiser than me. Wisdom comes from experience. And that's what the Tamir journey and the Planet N journey has taught me. So thank you very much from my side for all 4 of you for taking time out. Thank you, Naureen. And Naureen, I forgot to mention, is one of the co-founders and CEOs, which a company I invested in right after I had exited Telenor and started new companies. The co-founder, Hamza, is also here, and that company is doing great. So thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you so much. I actually don't want to end that. Everyone has spoken of Mr. Rahman here, and you've dedicated your book to her. You say this book is dedicated to my wife, who taught me the meaning of love and forgiveness. And it's actually, being a woman especially, it's so refreshing to see a man in a patriarchal culture like ours, who is in awe of his wife. She is, as everyone knows, she's a huge public figure. You both have excelled in your respective fields. But, we know how successful she is. I remember you jokingly telling us this incident once. You got this invitation from someone that stated, Mr. and Mrs. Sherry Rahman. So how do you, I really want to understand, I think it will be great for the male audience here to know how is it to, be the husband of such a successful woman, of course being a very successful man himself, but someone who might be more successful than you. How do you deal with that?
I'm the proudest person, in the room because my wife has done, what I was trying to do, create something for Pakistan. She's done a lot more than me. I think you've got to be secure in what you are, rather than compete what your spouse or your partner is. And we both respect that what we do. Although I must say, she has insights in my business, while I have very little insights of the political stuff that she does, which I value. So it's a very good, as long as you're not competing, you're respecting each other, and what they are, and you, in the end, listen to what she says, you're in good state.
Well, lovely. It's really been a pleasure speaking to each one of you and, learning of your journey and being a part of it in a very small way as well. But, I'd like to seal today's book launch, with maybe a note that you could actually close with, Mr. Hussain. But before that, all of you, the book is available here. It's also available online. I'd urge you all to order it today, right now, and, get to experience firsthand what his journey has been. Please, I'd like you to say a few words. Maybe something from your book, or otherwise maybe you were mentioning something that you'd like to say earlier. You report yourself. I'm saying you report yourself. We know how much you enjoy poetry. Maybe you could end with a few words.
I've read that book so many times and I can read it without looking at it. But I'm going to end with a verse which I'm, dedicating to young entrepreneurs, people who aspire to build a unicorn or 100 million or even a $10 million business. And that share is actually written by Salim Raza's father, nobody else. And it goes, क्यों कर संभालते हमें वो ना खुदा जो खुद साहिल की ओर से भंवर देखते रहे मंजिल की राह में आबला पा उठ खड़े हुए और शहसवार वो बारे सफ़र देखते रहे. So you are the people who are going to take this country, the young entrepreneurs, to the next level. Don't wait for the old captains of industry to do anything for you. They will be watching you as you overtake them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, sir. I know we've run out of time, but maybe we can give 5 minutes to the audience if they are, you have any questions or any comments, if you'd like to share anything. Okay? Challenge, great. Well, there's someone over there who has a question.
Mike did.
जी नदीम साहब बुक्स अभी मैंने ली है और अभी थोड़ा सा देखा है तो इसमें मुझे सॉरी वो मोटिवेशन शेर मैं ढूंढ रहा था जो हम खुद तराशते हैं मनाजिल के मंजिल तो वो अगर आप यहाँ पढ़ लें और ये बताएं कि जब वो आप किस तरह मोटिवेट करते थे एम्प्लॉयज़ को तामीर माइक्रो फाइनेंस. थैंक यू.
तामीर बैंक की जब भी मतलब सालाना मीटिंग होती थी या मैं ब्रांच में जाता था तो आई वुड ट्राई टू यूज़ अशार या कहानियाँ टू गिव माई मैसेज. और वो एक इकबाल का शेर था दैट इंस्पायर्ड मी द मोस्ट जो मैं दोबारा उसको दोहराता था. और वो इकबाल का शेर है कि हम खुद तराशते हैं मनाजिल के संग मील हम वो नहीं हैं जिनको ज़माना बना गया. शुक्रिया.
Thank you so much. That's it.